Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome back to an on the road edition of The Gathering. And we are coming to you this time from Calcutta in the state of
Bengal.
West. Is it West Bengal?
Oh God.
I think it's West Bengal.
West Bengal. Correct.
Okay. West Bengal. Famous for the place where Mother Teresa did so much of her work. We came here to meet up with my administrator from India, who's going to travel with us to Cambodia tonight. And we will be working there for Kaleidoscope Child Foundation for almost 3 weeks and then all coming back here. So anyway, we're excited for this new leg of the adventure. And so we're talking and we go, ooh, let's talk about that. And then ooh, let's talk about that. So we have a whole list of notes in the phone. And so what are we talking about?
Do you want to start with renunciation?
Renunciation. And
surrender.
Surrender. And I said
the death of dreams.
I was like, what were we talking about?
No
renunciation that felt so compelling that we put it in the iPhone notes. And then we're like, I don't remember. So we're going to talk about renunciation anyway. And when you hear that word, I think the unschooled version of me, when I would hear that word, would recoil a little bit because it felt punishing, it felt sacrificial. I have morphed into or expanded into an understanding that renunciation isn't to necessarily live this life of isolation and meagerness and asceticism inside of a cave with no belongings. That certainly is one form of renunciation, but it's much more nuanced and much more personalized. And you said it really great this morning at breakfast. What did you say?
What did I say?
It's in your iPhone.
I need to look. No, I think I said that. Renunciation is not in the action or the behavior itself. It's in the mind.
It's in the mind. And what did you mean by that?
So you can, let's say you're going to renounce meat. I'm not going to eat meat, but you're thinking about meat and you're wanting and you're desiring to eat it. Then you have not really renounced it because it's still holding you.
Okay.
So if you're tied to something and it's got you mentally and you keep thinking of it, then you haven't really renounced it.
So explain, what does it mean you haven't really renounced it? How does one really renounce anything? How do you reconcile that then within the mind?
Well, interestingly, I think renunciation is most purely done when it is not, it doesn't feel like a choice.
Oh.
So
or a demandment.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's put upon you. It's a you're joyfully
a revelation.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you become so overwhelmed in a sort of a rapturous love that it's easy to renunciate or renounce something because it no longer matches the elevated version of who you are.
Correct.
So it isn't this, you know how we've become so silly as a species, like even with Lent, like we're going to give up something for Lent for 40 days. Why? What good is I'm going to give up this materialistic thing if you're doing it from a whole complete skewed reason?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. So even if it's hard and you're doing it out of love, that's different than doing it out of ought and should. Okay. So if you're oughting and shoulding, then you're really doing renunciation from the wrong vantage.
So you've had some incredible experiences that maybe our studio audience doesn't know about. Such a host. And so I think the way that you've shared those times that you've experienced with me matches this idea of renunciation, but not from the should and the ought. It was just like a natural evolution. So in your time with Ram Dass, as a student, as a devotee, as someone who invested time, talent, and treasure in order to get to him in his final years, there were gifts that came from that, right?
Huge gifts.
Huge gifts. And so in those gifts, maybe tell us what some of those gifts were and how it helped you renounce things that no longer were a match.
Okay. Do you want me to start with a really kind of silly one?
Sure.
So since I was a child, I bit my fingernails out of nervous habit. And I had tried to renounce it, to give it up. Many
because you were
times.
should upon.
Well, it's gross, and who wants to do that? But it just was that problem just left me. And so it was not about, gosh, I really should stop and let me paint my nails with that gross stuff. And it just was removed.
Like a non-issue.
It became a non-issue.
And it was removed because of what happened to you in your visits with it. Like what?
Well, I guess maybe so the deeper parts of that were anxiety.
Okay.
Started to lift. My obsession with having to get things right. And really, so I started to live from a different vantage point from within myself. So I was no longer living from my mind.
Okay.
I was living from my heart. And in that state, there was no need to really worry about outward behaviors. And so oddly, the outward behaviors became more aligned with a purer, better version of me than I could have made myself be from my mind.
From force.
Sweet.
I get that. Yeah. And then, so that if that's an example of a silly one, what were some of the other ones that fall under this category?
Actually, meat, eating meat. And I was a carnivore. I just ate meat and I loved it. And I thought I'd give up vegetables before I gave up meat.
And you were a master griller.
I was. And came from Michigan, where it was meat and potato land. But I was through a series of revelations. One of them being our oneness with all things and beings, including rocks. So it's odd, but eating another animal became repulsive. It just came to me. It wasn't a thing that I kind of desired to do it. I mean, there was a sort of a give and a take of that revelation in my consciousness. And then how would I do this? How would my behaviors and my outward being align with that recognition? So my internal being became more integritous with my conscious thoughts.
And what I know about you, because I live with you, and is that choice, that renunciation to become a vegetarian did not lead you to then condemn other people who are not that. It was a personal choice. And I think what's tricky or interesting about us as a species that's both frustrating, annoying, perplexing, is that when we get on the bandwagon of a particular branding of renunciation, then we expect everybody else to get on the same bandwagon or to do it the same way. And that's not what this is about.
Correct.
Renunciation, then, as you said from your iPhone notes, it's not about the actions. It's about what takes place in the personalized conviction and journey of the mind. So your path of renunciation, my path of renunciation, I think, looks something like this. And this only works with a little bit of gradual self-awareness. I want to renounce the loyalty to my inner critic.
Mm.
That's a form of renunciation. I want to renounce the rapidness by which I self-criticize. I want to renounce the way in which I become consumed by this mythological concern about what other people think of me. And none of those things are original neuroses. They are the even point, the shared neurological malfunctioning of being human. So there's nothing unique about those stories. Everyone goes through that. Renunciation of those human defaults come from exploration, from self-awareness, from beginning to become curious about all things humanitarian, spiritual. If we stay in this bubble of conformity and adaptation of our environment, of our culture, of the religion, of our upbringing, of the belief systems of everybody else around us, then we don't really fall into or become introduced to a path of renunciation, a path of, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't feel good anymore. Like you, a path of, I don't think I want to eat meat anymore. That's personal. It isn't necessarily then where you have to go and you have to recruit. So, renunciation isn't about recruitment. It's about what we do in the privacy of our own devotion, of our own practice.
And when you come at any renunciation from that pure place where you're making that decision, or it becomes less of a decision and more of a just you fall into it, you don't have the need to convince others because you're not trying to convince yourself. So we always want to proselytize when our own internal belief systems are weak, or our own surety. If our own footing is wiggly, then we want to bring other people's minds in to support our own. But when we're just solid and on our path, there's no need to try to recruit others and support our own our beliefs.
And you told me something that just absolutely floored me about your private time with Ram Dass, and one of the final things he said to you. Do you know which one I'm referring to? About beware.
Oh. Well, he told me very specifically that my ego was masquerading as spirit. And I think that that's generalizable, but it was very particular to me.
And the way that you shared it with me was, beware the ego masquerading as spirit.
Correct.
And I think you should pause a little bit and take that in, because that isn't singularly pointing at any one individual. That too is a universal lightning bolt to consider. Beware the ego masquerading as spirit. So that's easy to look at the outer world, people. For me, what I notice in my loftiness of taking that and going, oh yeah, them and them and them and them, is there's, I say it this way, there's so much word salad out there. I see people trying so desperately hard to be relevant and clever. And so there's just so much word salad, meaning they're just saying so many things that don't have deep roots to them. It's like, what? Yeah. And so when we default to trying to be clever, that's the ego masquerading at, look how much I know. And I'm guilty of that. I've done that in my development, and I can't even say that I'm on the other side of it, but I notice it. I notice and I go, ooh, dial that back, David. Just get to the point. But beware the ego masquerading as spirit. It's there's a lot of levels to that. So first of all, there's a lot of people, a lot of egos masquerading as spiritual authorities, as this is the way of renunciation, right? You were sure that he was talking directly to you, about you.
It was.
How?
Because why?
Or why? Yeah.
Because I was definitely in a very high place. And
from the cumulative visits and study and work that you had been doing?
Yeah, and grace. I just got thrown into God consciousness. And
that doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, well, it wasn't so bad. It was rather blissful.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was very blissful. And I was clearly, well, Ram Dass would say, you got to know your zip code. And I wasn't that far off the ground, but I definitely was operating at some other plane, and there was a lot. I was green. I didn't know how to integrate what I was experiencing with day-to-day living. And you can, in India, they call them God intoxicants. And you can see them on Facebook, when people start to get a taste of the spirit. It's very thrilling. And there's can be a tendency to throw yourself all in
Western culture. God, there's so many different explanations of this, but I've seen people, they have their kundalini activated, and they kind of go out of their mind. Or you see people who have some revelation, and because there is no deep rootedness, all of a sudden they just go off,
right.
And again, it's like, do it my way. Yeah.
So I don't think I was quite doing,
I can't even imagine you being that way.
I was not.
But you were blissful.
But there were parts, and I think he wanted me to remember that it was very easy for the ego to hijack that whole experience and make it something really gross. And it was such a good warning for me.
Yeah.
To not go off on some deep end, trying to bring everybody with me, or there were so many ways that could have gone wrong for me. And
so how would you? So that just diamond advice. Then how do you incorporate that with the topic at hand in terms of renunciation? It's like, what are you renouncing in the mind when you are given that kind of pearl of wisdom?
Right. Well, it was painful, quite frankly. It did not feel super, because he said your ego is masquerading as spirit. And I thought, okay, which parts? And so it helped me to start to look at how I was thinking and behaving, and which parts were ego and which were genuine. And honestly, I think I said to him, well, that's kind of terrifying, because the ego then has to figure out which parts are ego and which parts are spirit. It's such a trap. You can't know. And so the renunciation becomes the mind. So releasing the thinking about which parts are and which parts aren't. The more I let go of the thoughts and became more identified with my spirit, where I just allowed my thoughts to be thoughts, whatever was coming, and I placed my awareness at the center of my being, and then just observed. And ideally, or not ideally, what's the right word? So the allowing the mind to just be doing what it does,
because it's going to do it anyway.
It's going to do it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, because you think that if you allow your mind to go, that you will become a horrible, that it'll run rampant, but it's actually the opposite. So you as I detached my energy from the thought machine and just hung back, it evens itself out. You unplug from, you don't juice up the righteousness, you don't juice up the anxiety, you don't juice up, you're just pulling the plug on it.
Many of the current teachers that talk about the observational part of mind, people like Michael Singer and the great book The Untethered Soul, the work that we just did earlier a month ago doing the Vipassana meditation, and S.N. Goenka, the master teacher of Vipassana, saying just observe, just observe. But you start to see that in order to really steady oneself in being in observation mode requires moment by moment renunciation.
Yeah.
We have no, well, maybe we do, but the need for the mind to control everything is one of the greatest shackles of being in human form. And but you have to become aware that that's what it is, that that we're shackled, that we are falsely creating some sense of solidity around the world, which is just complete BS. And so to observe the mind, because it's not going to go anywhere. We're not going to be completely free of it. It will always be there, but then you take away the keys.
Yeah, exactly. So that's great.
It's no longer driving. It's still going to be a passenger, but it's no longer directing everything. And so to just observe in and of itself is a beautiful form of renunciation that takes moment to moment practice. I mean, we were there for 10 days in this meditation study, and just the first 4 days, it was all about just observing this small little triangle area right here and the sensation of the airway going through the nostril for 4 days, from 4 a.m. till 9 p.m. And you start to get it. You start to get how off we are in with regards to the non-conscious way that we are controlling and managing and hanging on to and clinging and fabricating stories. And oh my God. So renunciation in and of itself leads to this freedom that everybody talks about, but we really don't know what it is. And the ego, this definition of the ego is the loyalty to separation that constantly wants to warn us that we're not doing enough.
Mm.
If I had to define that ego, that is the destructive part of the ego. It's the part that convinces us that separation is real and that we're not doing enough and that we're never doing enough. And no matter how big the arsenal and the protective devices and the energy, it's still not enough. And that's the complete, the layering and the layering and the layering of separation that becomes the biggest imprisonment. So to renounce all of that, even if you've been indoctrinated in it your whole life, renunciation of letting that go and just observing and still participating. Renunciation then is not going off and hiding in a cave. It is being in the world. It is doing all the things that we are doing, and yet doing them and still understanding how important it is to not be attached to the outcome.
One more thought.
Yeah.
Because when I told Ram Dass, when he said the part about my ego being masquerading as spirit, and I said that it was terrifying, he said, that's a thought, which I thought was funny. So, because it's just, we can get so tangled up in our separation.
So I don't know if any of this is of benefit to you, but I want to make it a little bit granular here and just leave you with this, and that is to be a renunciant isn't, again, some painted picture of a holy person climbing into a cave and leaving everyone and the world behind. It's being in the world. And while you're in the world, while you're in the grocery store, while you're at the bank, while you're on the phone, while you are interfacing with your family, while you are addressing a very complicated issue, while you are facing a fear, you do all of those things and you can practice a personal, meaningful sense of renunciation by moving past something that would have kept you frozen before. Do you understand? So there's so much fear baked into our history, and we don't even realize that we stop ourselves in for meaningful moments of expansion because we're so accustomed to the fear that we go, oh, I just don't do that. So it's masquerading as some, well, that's just who I am, which is not true. And so if we can come to notice the things that we say, notice the habits that are all fear-based, and then go meet those fears and renounce the fear with regards to the mental construction around it, the form of, and here's where I would go back to your quote and I say maybe it's a little bit of mind and action, because to renounce the mind's history and to also renounce the action means that you and I are going to step into something that's a whole new formula of behavior and thinking.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think when I said it's not about the action or behavior, it's not that renunciation is not about the thing that you do or don't do. It's about the way that you approach the thing.
Right.
Which is exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So if I am facing a fear,
I give an example. Like, so some of these baked in fears. So, people we've got a big group coming to Cambodia. We leave tonight. And there are people in this group who are coming who have a lot of fears around travel. And I sent them all a group email and I said, let's all experiment together. Let's practice being equanimous. Everyone is in pain. The whole world is in pain. We're in pain in all kinds of different forms. And I said, knowing that, why don't we push past the pain? Why don't we push past the fear? So if the luggage is going to get lost, if there's going to be a missed flight, a missed connection, what's the point in getting upset? What's the point in throwing our arms up in exasperation? What's the point in yelling at anyone? And why don't we just accept the fact and realize that this is the moment where we can renounce old behavior and move into a new way of being? That's the topic of renunciation. That's the practice. That's the thing that we kind of want to tickle you a little bit and invite you to explore. Right?
Yeah.
All right. We'll be seeing you and greeting you in Cambodia. Till next time. Blessings.
Blessings.